The U.S. incarcerates more of our population than any other nation on earth while championing civil rights and liberty. Our goal is to deconstruct the power of the state through thoughtful, independent perspectives on our society. I am MJ.
And I'm Ty Brigger. Welcome to DeCarcerated Podcast, episode number 8. The Steve Young episode.
I'm curious.
Or Troy Aikman. Depends how you want to go.
He was on American Idol, right?
Super anti-Dallas Cowboy. So, super anti-Dallas Cowboy, in case anybody's wondering. I can't call it the Troy Aikman episode. I would much rather call it the Steve Young San Francisco 49er episode. So, today, also, we took a week off. As everybody, our 1 million subscribers out there probably know, we're jonesing for the DeCarcerated podcast. We took the 4th of July week off. We got 5 kids, people. We got things. This isn't how we make our money. We do this just on the side.
And you have to make time to blow things up.
You gotta make time to blow things up.
And go to the Yampa fireworks because nobody does it like Yampa.
Nobody can outlaw the way that Yampa can outlaw.
Yeah, it's true.
Let's put it like that.
That's the best way to put it.
That's for sure. So today, we're going to talk about Supreme Court precedent, history of the Supreme Court, why the hell it matters, and why the hell you should care because it's only your entire life, and cultural morality based on founding ideals, okay, which is also super interesting and plays right in to the Supreme Court stuff because we're talking about founding documents and ideals. Then we'll finish with our coward and hero of the week. All right, so let's kick this bad boy off. For those of you that may not be aware, the U.S. Supreme Court has been pumping out rulings lately, just pumping them out. I think that it's super important to understand the Supreme Court precedent as that, more than anything, impacts your life, believe it or not, legally speaking. We'll get into some recent historic court decisions and what they meant for society, how they impacted society, and why the hell it should matter to us moving forward. Real quick, before we get into that, we'll go over the court itself a little bit. How do we get our justices? How long do they stay on the bench? How many of them are there? First of all, they are part of the judicial branch with 3 branches of government. Article 2, Section 2 of the United States Constitution states that the president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court. Man, that wording is always
because they're closing up loopholes.
Oh yeah, they're just like
they're
boom,
just
they're locking it down.
Yep,
because it's too easy to get out of shit. There are no qualifications, people, or requirements for Supreme Court justices. Believe it or not, there isn't. But all past appointees have at least studied law. Okay, that seems like that would be important.
I'm shocked that it's not a requirement.
Right. Once the president makes a nomination, the confirmation process then begins. The Supreme Court nominations process first begins with the executive branch, obviously the president. With counsel, the president picks their nominee for the Supreme Court. This nominee will then face the Senate Judiciary Committee, which can decide to hold a hearing on the nominee. The committee has to vote for the nominee to face a vote from the rest of the Senate. So they vote on whether or not the Senate should vote on this person to be confirmed. So
like an advisory committee
exactly
that acknowledges this person may be competent. Let's move it to the next phase. Okay. I'm trying to translate for lay people like me who just now understood that.
Oh yeah. It's like the Security Council of the United Nations. So you have like the whole United Nations, and then you have the Security Council, which is like Germany, France, Great Britain, the United States, Russia, and China, I think. I might be wrong with one of them, but I'm pretty sure that's it. But they make like the decision, even though all the other states and representatives that are in the UN, like they decide and then it's pumped out.
They're gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Got it.
So it's kind of like that with the Senate Judiciary Committee. All right. So the Senate then conducts a debate, votes to end the debate if they believe they have enough information, and then votes on the nominee. The nominee will be appointed to the Supreme Court if the Senate votes to do so. If he or she is not approved by the Senate, that individual is then dead on arrival. It will not be a Supreme Court justice. This happened during the Obama administration, at the end of his administration, various other administrations, when they did not hold the majority in the Senate. That's why when we talk about partisan rulings, that's what we're talking about. Okay. Once one has been appointed to the Supreme Court, that appointment lasts the rest of their lifetime, if they so choose. Total amount of judges, 9. The reasoning behind the number being an odd number should be fairly obvious, but in case it's not, because there's never bad questions or dumb questions.
There are so many dumb questions. If you've ever been a teacher or a parent, there are dumb questions.
There are, but you're supposed to say that, right?
I disagree. How else do we learn?
Johnny, that is a dumb question.
That's a dumb question.
But Johnny's a great name.
Let's move on.
Yeah. All right. It's to prevent a tie, people. You can't get a tie with 9, as far as I know of. At least in this realm, you can't. All right. Interest in the court recently has kicked up a lot since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, essentially making abortion a federalism issue, as in now kicking it down to the states for states' rights. All right. 10th Amendment, by the way, in case you're wondering. Other rulings this year include, and I'm going to give you a reference list just on all the rulings that have taken place in 2023. All right. And we're only going to go into a few of them, as I'm sure I'll restate again. So starting with affirmative action, student loans, religion, free speech, gay rights, Senate, legislators, and federal elections, race and voting maps, tribal rights, religious employees, environmental protection, animal cruelty and interstate commerce, fair use of copyright works, scope of tech platforms liability shield, tech platforms and terrorism. Sounds cooler than it is. And that's it. So, you're going to say something? I feel like you're about ready to say something.
I was going to be a smart aleck. I was going to say, what about the decision on tech platforms and mixed martial arts? But that's an aside. We'll save it.
Tech platforms and mixed martial arts?
Zuckerberg.
Like
Musk.
more? Oh, yeah. Zuckerberg, Musk, 1. I'm sure it'll be just as good as Rocky and Apollo Creed 1.
I think it's going to be an exercise in just wanting to see them uncomfortable.
Oh my God. There might be something a little bit gratifying about watching them punch each other in the face, though.
I know who I want to. Yeah.
I mean, I'm Team Musk all the way.
Yeah, I thought for just a second you were going to say.
I was going to say I almost
like,
accidentally said Zuckerberg. I did say. I think I about said Zuck. Yeah, I'm Team Musk. I got to do it. I mean, I got to be. But the thing is Zuckerberg's actually got a shit ton of jiu-jitsu experience. He competes in tournaments.
Well,
I think he's a brown belt.
And he's training with some really good people too. But
yeah,
who cares? It's just
that's the thing about Brazilian jiu-jitsu that people don't get. Like, go watch the original UFCs and you see Royce Gracie choke the fuck out of like a 325-pound man over and over again.
Upside down.
He's like 170
upside down
pounds.
triangle.
Yeah.
Upside down triangle.
That's
yeah.
what we say, that like Brazilian jiu-jitsu is the most applicable form of martial arts
Next,
by far on the
next
planet.
to Sam Colt, it is the great equalizer.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. So you never know. Never know what you're gonna get. All right, so we're going to start with affirmative action. All right, that's what we're going to start with here, primarily for university enrollment, which, according to polling, was wildly unfavorable to the American public, with around 75% disagreeing with affirmative action entirely. Like, that even surprised me.
That's a lot.
That surprised me. It's actually like 73 to 75% based on what I could find, but that is a huge number.
Yeah.
That's a huge number. And that's not like, those aren't people that like don't know anything, because the people that are like, yes, no, indifferent. Like, indifferent is they don't know shit about shit. Like, these are people that are hardline no. That's that's a heavy number. In a 6-3 decision split down partisan lines, the Supreme Court overturned affirmative action. What does this mean exactly? Honestly, this really affects the Asian community, believe it or not, more than anybody else. Asians have been getting railroaded by the university system for years, generations actually. They perpetually, without question, have the best test scores, ACT, SAT test scores, unquestionably. It's not even close, actually. However, apparently, if you're Asian, you're not a minority as far as the universities are concerned. Their goal is to fill up the American university system with more African Americans and more Hispanics, because apparently blacks and Hispanics are more minority than Asians. But that's bullshit, as everybody with the real brain understands. I don't even think if I need to really even like go into why that's bullshit. The problem is that Asians are just too damn smart. They're too smart. Okay? They're so smart that the universities no longer consider them minorities because of their intelligence. Imagine that. Or imagine this, being an Asian kid who's like 16, 17 years old, male or female, who has gone out of his or her way to totally invest in his or her education. You study for hours every single night because it's part of the social fabric of your community, being Asian, and it's the expectation of your household. You don't party, you don't gangbang, you don't hang out and shoot the shit at all. You spend every last second you have making yourself more academically viable, and your reward for this achievement, for all of this planning, sorry, not minority Asian kid. You'll have to settle for a community college or a low-level state institution. Why? Well, you don't know. Silly Asians. Your minority status just isn't, well, it's just not really what we're looking for. Not the minorities we're looking for. I mean, that's it. That's basically it. Do you got any thoughts on that?
I do. The university enrollment process is a cash cow, and it is inherently and ironically racist.
Oh.
So when you look at out-of-state tuition, it's nothing compared to out-of-country costs. And when you're looking at a population of people that are going to, by leaps and bounds, overtake any of the domestic population when it comes to like, not necessarily just rote intelligence, but like ability to adhere to like the academic protocols and success within a university setting. So there is always an allotment in these DEI, kind of like diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's audits and there's also initiatives. So if a university wants to be a very diverse university, they're going to really tokenize anybody that is from a different background. But it's not necessarily to celebrate and uplift and to integrate. It's because that tuition and the housing costs and the inability to access domestic scholarships create an enormous cash flow. So that cash flow, though, is relegated to a specific domain of finance. So you have, that's where we get our cash cow. This is where we get our grant dollars for diversity. And this is where we get tuition costs. So it's very economic for a university, but it is inherently exclusionary and racist. And from a lot of the Asian students that I spoke to, whether they were first generation from migrant families or they were actual like exchange students, their resounding cry from a very liberal, diverse university that I was at was that they felt overwhelmed with the recruitment process, extorted with the financial process, and completely abandoned once they got there.
That sounds about right. And also, and this is important. So the universities have come out. They're obviously really pissed about this. Yes. They're super upset about
and
this.
Impact dollars.
And so for them, they're like, fine, you guys won't let us we're not going to use testing anymore. We just won't do it. We're going to do essays now. Essay questions. What do you think those questions are going to be?
Tell us how you've struggled with being a minority we can tokenize and display to everybody.
Yeah, I guarantee you there will be questions on you directly on those essays directly related to race, and they've already stated they're going to do it. You can Google it. We can Google machine it now. It's all over the place. Like university after university after university after university was already prepared for this decision to be made and had statements ready to go for it as soon as it was made. And they're already saying that they're going to go away from the testing and they're going to go to essays and the very specific essay questions. So they're going to curtail it. It'll be interesting to see how it works.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
I'm conflicted about that.
I'll tell you what, man, the university system there is so much wrong with the university system when it comes to how much they charge for kids and then demand student loans to just be paid off while they're every single year increasing kids' student loans every single year so they can build a fucking $15 million high school or a $15 million football stadium and a weightlifting facility and brand new uniforms for all this other kind of stuff. And they're like, we got to build this and that, and we got to raise your tuition every single semester. Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
And charge you for parking and living.
Yeah. But I'll tell you what, I this ruling, as far as I'm concerned, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. It's an interesting first step. I definitely don't disagree with it personally.
I'm conflicted about the essay thing. I like qualitative data. I think it's an opportunity to get a more holistic picture of things. And I do think you should take.
Who the hell is how many essays are going to be submitted?
But that's the thing, is it's good it's like communism. Looks good on paper, but in practice, you know what's going to happen is you're going to have human beings providing those judgments.
Yeah, they say communism is for the communists, not the people.
Yeah, yes.
Or it's for the people, not the communists. I'm sorry. It's for the people, not the communists.
There you go. That's true. I was like, yeah, okay. But it's the same thing as like interpreting scripture and saying that it's God breathed. Is you have to remember still that
you're dealing with an individual person's interpretation of the work.
It's like every time you've called the VA.
It's like, yeah, exactly. It's like dealing with a singular person in the Veterans Administration who is capable of making decisions, which is entirely different than if you would have made the call 3 minutes earlier or 3 minutes later and talked to a different person.
If they didn't have gas from their burrito from Taco Del Mar, they might have made a different decision about your life.
And then it's not a big deal. It only impacts the rest of your existence on this planet. So
it's like custody and judges.
All right. So from that, we're going to go to something way less controversial. Student loan debt.
I should have saved my comments for this one. Dang it.
And we thought abortion was touchy. Student loan debt cancellation draws a very similar emotional response to abortion. Those that are for it are violently for it. Those that are against it are violently against it. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a conversation about this. But first, we'll go over the details of the decision. The court ruled that the Biden administration's plan to wipe out more than $400 billion in student debt was not authorized by Congress, which it wasn't. Once again, in a 6-3 decision split strictly down party lines, having determined that Missouri was the state that originally challenged the Biden's order, okay? There always has to be an existing court case that has been settled before it gets pushed to the Supreme Court. When Missouri challenged this, it had a direct impact on the rest of the states, okay? The right to challenge, they wanted to challenge the debt relief program. The court then turned to the heart of the case, whether the debt relief program complies with federal law, the law of the land. Here, the court agreed with the challengers that it did not, as in Missouri. The HEROES Act, or the Health and Economic Recovery Omnibus Emergency Solutions Act, the HEROES Act, was proposed legislation acting as a $3 trillion stimulus package in response to COVID-19 pandemic. Now, we also sent a lot of that money to Pakistan and other countries too. When they say the $3 trillion stimulus COVID-19 packet, like American citizens didn't just get all that shit. No. There's a lot of other countries that got it.
All of you will know that as you got $600. Yep.
Okay. Judge Roberts emphasized gives the Secretary of Education the power to waive or modify laws and regulations governing the student loan program. Congress's use of the word modify means that the Biden administration can make, quote, modest adjustments and additions to existing provisions. Roberts wrote, not transform them. He cannot just overtly change them. He can modify them. But the debt relief program, Roberts stressed, instead created a novel and fundamentally different loan forgiveness program. The plan modifies student loan laws and regulations. It doesn't make modest adjustment, actually modifies it. Roberts suggested, quote, only in the same sense that the French Revolution modified the status of the French nobility. It has abolished them and supplanted them with a new regime entirely. So he's making that connection, saying that it isn't a tweak, it's an abolishment and a reestablishment, and that is what is unlawful about it. Thoughts?
I think that the trying to get into the nuts and bolts of the meaning of a word with modification still opens it up to saying, okay, to modify means to change without altering the fundamental aspect of it. It's a loan program. It's an extorting loan program. But if you could modify it, because I'm looking at the intention and the outcome for American citizens.
Mm-hmm.
We as a country have never decided collectively whether or not higher education or just public education as a whole is an economic or a human rights endeavor. And so if it's an economic endeavor, then there is a lot of legitimacy in saying you should repay this. But if it is a human rights endeavor that says we will create a more informed citizenry, then I think that you should modify to the point of like complete alteration when it comes to those loan programs.
So I'm going to, here's the deal. It's a lot of fancy language, and the Supreme Court is technically right for sure. Just like they were kind of technically right about abortion being a federalism issue and not written in the Constitution. Their design as the legislative branch is to interpret the Constitution, the validity of law based on the Constitution. Okay. Here's the beef that I have. In this country, when you're 15 years old, 16 years old, 14 years old, you were told by your parents and you were told by your teachers that you need to have a plan for your life. Okay. For the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life. Now, I don't know about a lot of you out there, but when I was like 16, 17, I didn't know shit about shit. I didn't have a clue, all right, about what I was going to be doing the rest of my life. And quite frankly, it's unrealistic to expect some punk-ass teenager to think that they're going to have an idea about what they want to do when they're 42 years old, all right? We push them on purpose into these institutions.
Why?
We do. Because as a society, we say, and we tell them through the educational system, through the Department of Education and through parents, that in order for them to be successful in this world and in this community, in this realm, in this existence, in the United States of America, then they need to be educated. Okay. The only way you get a good job is by getting an education. An education will provide you the foundation you need to be able to get a good job, therefore starting a family, buy a mortgage, get health insurance, a vehicle, get a retirement, live the American dream. All right. So we push this on them. And then we tell them when they do it and they're $80,000 in debt, that they're responsible for making these payments back entirely for a decision that they made when they were like 17, 18 years old.
Yep.
Okay. I am 100% for vocational training. Electricians, welders, mechanics, we need way more of that stuff. And quite frankly, they make better fucking money anyway than people that get master's degrees in philosophy. Mm-hmm. They really do. All right. Few points. You don't know shit about shit when you're a teenager, and when you get saddled with that much debt when you're that young and your brain isn't even freaking fully developed. Mm-hmm. It is irrational to think that that human being was fully conscious and aware of the decisions that they were making when they signed that paperwork.
Which makes the Department of Education an extortionist.
Absolutely. Secondarily, number two, okay? As a society and as a country, and we have no problem with sending $100 billion to Ukraine, okay? We have no problem with spending billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in the global war on terrorism. We have no problem with signing that. We talked about this COVID-19 bill with the $3 trillion. We sent a lot of that money to freaking Pakistan and other countries.
Mhm.
I am fully of the belief that we should reinvest in our own people and our own infrastructure. Why in the hell are we sending all this damn taxpayer money that you and I make that comes out of our paychecks to all these countries when we could be rebuilding South Chicago, Watts, Los Angeles, or paying for some kid who lives in freaking Iowa from the trailer hood to get a freaking college education?
Or have clean drinking water.
Why are the people in Pakistan entitled to my money and not my own children for their education?
Mhm.
And on top of that, I'm still paying for their lower level public school education through my tax dollars as well anyway.
Mhm.
This is my beef with it. Do I think that you should be responsible for your actions, for the choices that you make? Absolutely 100%. Yes, I do. As a man or as a woman, making those decisions based on your previous experience and education and understanding of how the system works. You do not have that when you were 17, 15, 18 years old, 22 years old. You don't. It's ridiculous to think that people do, or these kids do, because they don't. And guess what? You fucking didn't either. You didn't either. All of you out there saying that they should just pay it back and not give a shit and quit caring and quit bitching about it. You didn't know what the hell you were doing when you were that age either. You didn't. And you're lying if you say you did. Okay? Very few of you did. So what do you want? What do you want? You can't have it both. You can't have everything out there. You can't. You got to make some decisions here. Are we giving all this money to Ukraine and Pakistan to provide all these wars? Or are we going to pay for our own infrastructure and all the stuff that we got going on in this country? Because you can't have it all. We are $30 trillion in debt right now. It's not even a real number. We are $30 trillion in debt, and we just raised the debt ceiling again. And we sent $100 billion. We're up to like $100 billion in Ukraine now. What would $1 billion? What would one in South Chicago is more dangerous than any other place in this country, and it was more dangerous than Baghdad, even when Baghdad was maybe not at its height being dangerous, but pretty comparable. What the hell would $1 billion do for the infrastructure of South Chicago?
Particularly $1 billion given to the people who live there and know how
No,
to do
hey,
that.
no, they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Right.
Screw them.
Yeah, they don't have shoes, but bootstraps.
Yeah. And we'll get into some more of that Supreme Court precedent on why that's nonsense too, a little bit later on. But I mean, it's like, you got to think about these things. It's not, it's like I talked about before, just because it's right doesn't mean the other thing's wrong. And just because one thing's wrong doesn't mean the other thing's right. There's a lot of stuff that goes into these kind of things. There's a lot of things that go into it. All right. Is there anything else you want to say about it before I move on to the next one?
No, that's good.
Okay. You sure? You're really into this thing.
I really am. I get very furious. I get very angry. It's government extortion. I mean,
it's government extortion, and it's institutional extortion, because the institutions are just as responsible for this as the government is.
100%. But it's also short-sighted, because if you want to have economic development and opportunity, then the best thing you can do is to alleviate the crushing debt and credit implications that occur when somebody is at a formative developmental age that then proceeds through a higher education to obtain a degree, to be able to have a career of meaning and have a family wage. And then you saddle them with unbelievable debt, preventing them from ever meaningfully contributing to the economics of their community.
And meanwhile, telling them at the same time that if they don't get that education, they're not going to get a job.
You better borrow this money or you're deficit. But then when you do borrow it, you're a criminal if you ask for forgiveness or help.
And also, people, for those of you that don't know, it's not the same as a regular loan. Mm-mm. When you die, it passes on to your kids and your medical kids' kids.
It's the same as medical debt.
Exactly. Yep. It does not go away under any kind of circumstances at all. Like I said, people have to take responsibility for what they do, 100%. But I don't give my kids the same punishments as I would give an adult for the same actions.
Yeah. Well, nor the same circumstances, because this is that whole situational morality. So if you're looking at, okay, you have a medicine, the medicine is you need this medicine for your wife. She's dying. She's going to die. This is a classic conditional, It's a classic condition, right? To determine morality and levels of morality and maturation in a kid or an adult. You have your wife, me. Okay, I'm super sick. I'm going to die. I have to have medicine. It's $2,000. Wait, nope. You have 2,000. Now it's 4 because I need to make money because I own the patent. So you have
or you need to get
$2,000.
better at finding coupons.
Yeah, which does work. But at the same time, you have, okay, she's going to die. I'm going to die. Do you steal my medicine?
I feel like that shouldn't.
Do you steal I'm going to die though. You can't pay for it.
Oh, would I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would.
You would. Why?
100% I would.
Why?
Because it would save your life. And that is more meaningful to me than being incarcerated for stealing your medicine.
So it's more ethical to save a human life than it is to ensure that whoever has the patent to that gets their money.
Yep.
How's that different from any other extortive practice that we're talking about with student loans?
Oh, it's not at all.
You have a good life if you get an education. Oh, I extorted you. Too bad.
Yep.
So who has the moral high
you owe us
ground?
money for the rest of your life.
Yep. And your
so
kids
does your
do.
family, and so does your kids.
Yep. It's extortion.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Do you have anything more to add? No. Except for this.
I know there's gonna be a lot of strong feelings with that out there.
That's okay.
You know.
That's welcome.
Yeah.
I
think you need to think your way. I think you need to think your way through stuff and research stuff. You can't just, like opinions are great, man, as long as they're based on
informed
research.
Opinions are wonderful.
Informed opinions. Yeah. All right. Here's another one: religion, free speech, and gay rights. In a 6-3 decision, down party lines. Once again, surprise, surprise, the court ruled that a web designer has the First Amendment right to refuse to create sites for same-sex weddings despite a state law that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation. Colorado law, original case stems from Colorado. Once again, like I said, you have to have an initiating case before it gets to the Supreme Court. Prohibits businesses, including creative and artistic businesses, from discriminating against gay customers. Some people think this violates business owners' rights to free speech. Other people think it does not violate business owners' rights to free speech. Here, the Supreme Court ruled that it did. I don't know how much I have to really add to that. I honestly kind of agree with it. I think that as an individual and as a business, I don't think the Constitution stops.
I can hold both things.
Yeah, for that.
I don't think it's I don't think it's okay to discriminate against gay people at all.
Of course. Yeah.
I think that is my personally held belief. And if I owned and operated a business, that would be the edict I give to my employees in my business plan. But at the same time, I also recognize that if somebody walked in and said, you need to recognize me as a child attracted person, or you need to recognize me as a socially supported person. I don't have to work. I just want people to pay for me. Like if there was something moral within me that said, I don't like that. I think that as a business owner, I have the right to say, I am uncomfortable.
Sure.
That's the only thing I can think of. So I think you can have both things. Like exactly. I disagree that you should discriminate on these grounds, but I agree that you should not force your morality on me.
And it would change if that business owner was like, no, I'm not doing it because you guys are a bunch of bleep, 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 bleeps. That would change it, right? Okay. So like this is really, it's just a personal opinion that this individual has as an individual and as a business owner. Okay. So I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's an interesting thing, and it's not the first time that we've seen it, because there was a case that was similar to this, not all that a few years ago.
The cake.
Yep,
the wedding cake.
The wedding cake one.
Which made me so sad. Like that's a horrible thing to walk into a place and have somebody be like, no, because of who you are, I'm not going to do this for you. That sucks.
It sucks.
But is it legal?
That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like just because something sucks doesn't mean that it's illegal and people should be incarcerated for it. We can disagree with people all the time. Doesn't mean they should go to jail for disagreement.
It ties in nicely to what I'm going to say. That was a good job.
Huh?
It ties in nicely.
Oh, good.
As usual.
Okay. All right. Tribal rights. Oh, man. This one is super interesting to me. And it's not just because I'm writing a book based on the Indian Wars.
Yes, you are. Don't even say maybe.
Kind of be. Yes, maybe it is a little bit more interesting to me because of that. I've been working on this book for like a year and a half.
Some people write for like 25.
It's going to
30,
be
40
long. Yeah. In a 7-2 decision, not split down party lines, which is super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The court upheld the Indian Child Welfare Act, a 1978 law that seeks to keep Native American children with their tribes and preserve their heritage. But the ruling did not resolve the question of whether the law discriminated against non-Native families based on race. So let me make things a little bit more clear here about what this means. In 1978, Congress enacted a law that says that Native American children who are removed from their families should be placed with extended family members or foster homes of people who are also Native American. Some people think this law discriminates on the basis of race. Okay. Listen, if you're one of those people that don't think that Native Americans got a horribly bad deal after the expansion of the West, honestly, there's nothing we're going to say here to convince you, and you're probably just going to shut it off. Fine. As the information validating the atrocities that the Indians in our country faced is exceedingly overwhelming, we, our government, did not honor a single treaty. Not one. How do you feel about people that break their promises to you?
I think that they're the worst.
That's what happened over and over and over again. Not one. Our diseases laid waste. Honestly, starting with the Spanish in South America. That's really where it started. That's how the whole thing kicked off. Killing millions and millions of Native Americans across the North and South American continent. Additionally, our government intentionally and maliciously gave struggling tribes and individuals resources filled or embedded with disease, fleas, ticks, bacteria, to include but not limited to blankets and food. We destroyed the American buffalo, damn near made the creature completely extinct. We completely deforested the Midwest. For those of you that may not know, the Midwest was once very, very forested. Those forests are gone, never to return. Plainly, the Native American peoples of the past witnessed the Anglo-Saxon European expansion of the West as an intentional, deliberate, destructive Leviathan it was. They understood it. Just like every other time in history where conquest has been enacted, the indigenous people were sacrificed for the good of progress. They're not special. The Native Americans are not special in this. This has happened it happened to the Germanic tribes with the Roman Empire. It's happened everywhere, over and over and over again. Not saying that it makes it right, but there are things that we can do. Their resources were raped, their lands were seized, and the people are worse. The children were shipped off to re-education schools. It's also happening in Australia, right, with the Aborigine.
Yeah.
Headed up by, you guessed it, the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like the Nazis.
Yeah.
That's what it sounds like to me. It sounds like the Nazis. But it wasn't the Nazis. It was us. So we turn a blind eye. We're getting better about it. I remember when I was a kid. When I was a kid, people refused to acknowledge what happened. Like they gave excuse after excuse after excuse after excuse on why it happened.
Yeah, it was whitewashing history. That's how all of our textbooks are written.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are a few things about this, though. Okay, I will say this. When it says that children who are removed from their families should be placed with extended family members or foster homes of people who are also Native American, that works for me as long as those people have their shit together.
Yeah.
Okay? Because, listen, I worked at Montana, Youth Challenge Academy. I was a drill sergeant for underprivileged youth when I got out of the Army for a little bit. And most of these kids came from the tribes in Montana, the Crow, the Nez Perce, some others. And the reservations were so bad that if one of those kids got taken because of child abuse or neglect,
That's extreme.
there really was, if like there wasn't families that they could like place them back into, because all of their extended families were just as dicked up as the place that they just got taken out of. So I do not agree that they should just be in the tribal community to simply be in the tribal community if they're going to be raped, if they're going to be abused, just to be in the tribal community.
Yeah.
Okay. So that doesn't work for me either. Like, the only way that this works for me is if these families, they have to be vetted as well. And they're going to have to be vetted by the system that they don't trust, but it's just too damn bad. It's too bad, because I will not I will not pull a child from a home and put that child into a home that is the exact same home just because they come from the same ethnic background. I can't agree to that either. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot to it. It's complex because we are the orchestrators of their destinies, but we are also the orchestrators of their demise.
Yep.
And it is the fault of the U.S. government that the conditions within those reservations are as they are. And it is also which makes me hesitant to put the responsibility on the same entity that created the problem. So I am conflicted. I do think cultural heritage is more important.
Here's my thing, though.
Not over safety.
I get it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Over safety.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
So when we get to this point to where children who are removed from their families, there's a reason they were removed from this is 1978.
Yeah.
This is a 1978 law. It's not an 1878 law.
No, it's like
it's a 1978 law.
It's almost the 80s.
So what this is really talking about a lot of time when they're talking about these kids, they're talking about kids who are abused.
Yeah.
Okay. I would prefer 100% for them to stay with their tribes and their families, if at all possible.
Mm-hmm.
But if that's not capable because they cannot vet these families, or they have a history of doing the same shit, then at that point, yeah, I don't give a shit. I don't care where they go as long as they go somewhere safe.
Yeah, and loving.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the catch-22 with this whole thing.
Yes.
All right. That puts us up to date. We discussed abortion a bit in the past. We're not going to do it a whole lot here. There's an election coming up. We're going to talk about it more, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So I'm going to go over some history really quick. We're probably sitting, I know I've talked a lot. We've talked a lot. So I'm going to go over a little bit of history here, a little bit of Supreme Court precedent, and talk to you about why a lot of these institutions aren't trusted, especially by the minority peoples of this country. All right. Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. The United States Supreme Court held that the U.S. Constitution did not extend American citizenship to people of Black African descent, and thus they could not enjoy the rights and privileges the Constitution conferred upon regular American citizens. The decision involved the case of Dred Scott, an enslaved Black man who was born in 1799, whose owners had taken him from Missouri. This is the second time we've talked about Missouri. I just realized that.
It's right there making waves.
Yeah. Missouri is kind of a big deal, folks. A slaveholding state, Missouri, into Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory, where slavery was illegal. When his owners later brought him back to Missouri by force, Scott sued for his freedom and claimed that because he had been taken into the free part of the United States territory, he had automatically been freed and was legally no longer a slave. Scott sued first in Missouri State Court, which ruled that he was still a slave under its law. He then sued the U.S. Federal Court, which ruled against him, deciding that it had to apply Missouri state law against him. He then sued he then appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. In March 1857, the Supreme Court issued a 7-2 decision, 7-2, not even close. So overwhelming against Scott. Okay. In an opinion written by Chief Justice Robert Taney, the court ruled that people of African descent are not included, were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures the citizens of the United States. However, many Republicans, including Abraham Lincoln, who was rapidly at that time becoming the leading Republican candidate out of Illinois, regarded the decision as part of a plot to expand and eventually impose the legalization of slavery throughout the states. For those of you that don't know, Slavery was not legal across the United States at that time. It was a federalism issue, a states' rights issue. Some Southern extremists even wanted all states to recognize slavery as a constitutional right. So at that time, there were powers in the South that wanted to amend the Constitution and put slavery into the Constitution of the United States, people. Lincoln rejected the court's majority opinion that the right of property in a slave is distinctly and expressly affirmed in the Constitution, pointing out that the Constitution did not ever mention property in reference to slaves, and in fact, explicitly referred to them, blacks, as persons. It did. I've read it. Thomas Jefferson, one of the primary architects of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, wanted to include the following statement in both of those documents, but was voted down by the other people that helped him out draft the Constitution and Declaration. He, as in King George, has waged a cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who have never offended him, captivating them and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thereof. Jefferson wanted to include this because he foresaw the eventual conflict of race our country would face, and we did. Back to the ruling. Southern Democrats considered Republicans to be lawless rebels who were provoking disunion by their refusal to simply accept the Supreme Court's decision as the law of the land. The result? The Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War, and around 500,000 dead Americans. Finally, resulting in the slave amendments of the Constitution, which were the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, for those of you out there that may not know. Sometimes known as the Reconstruction, or as I said, slave amendments. The 13th Amendment states the following: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their existence or to their jurisdiction, formally abolishing slavery. Also, believe it or not, the 13th Amendment is a reason why we had chain gangs. Oh. Right? So there's always these workarounds. Who do you think participated in the chain gangs? Chain gangs were 99% African-American, 99% in the South, African-American. After what? Jim Crow. And we'll talk about that in a minute. All right. Anything you want to say about that before I move on to the next one?
Nope, I'm good.
The civil rights cases, 1883. Another testament to the court's failure to protect civil rights. The civil rights cases struck down the Civil Rights Act of 1875, which was 8 years earlier. That law sought to ban racial discrimination in businesses and public accommodations. The court, in an 8-1 decision, even more than Dred Scott, even more overwhelming than Dred Scott, held that the enforcement provisions of the 13th and 14th Amendment do not allow Congress to prevent non-governmental racial discrimination. What did this lead to? It led directly to the Jim Crow laws, because they basically said that this is a states' rights issue. Which brings us to 1896. Pelzey versus Ferguson, the court's famous separate but equal ruling, upheld state segregation laws. In doing so, the court made sure that the gains of the post-Civil War Reconstruction era were quickly replaced by decades of Jim Crow laws. Separate water fountains, top of the courthouse.
Separate but equal, except for you have domination over all of society and you can separate somebody, which is just segregation.
Just pretty language.
Yeah, it's pretty language for racism.
The Patriot Act.
Yeah, yep.
You don't have a Fourth Amendment anymore, but it's called the Patriot Act.
Yeah, we'll call it something
because it's super patriotic. All right, so there's our Jim Crow laws right there, people, which took all the way up until the 60s to freaking get done away with. So it was like 70 years of Jim Crow. Way to go. Hammer versus Dagenhart, 1918. Here the court ruled that Congress could not ban child labor in interstate commerce. Sure, Congress could legislate against gambling and other vices, but whether children were to be kept out of mines or factories was a question that only states could decide. Nothing prohibiting child labor in the Constitution, I'm afraid. Of course, this was overturned with the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Before then, it was basically legal to work your children to death if you so chose.
It's terrible. You know, a lot of child protection laws only originated because an attorney realized that there were animal rights laws in place prior to any rights protecting children.
Yeah.
Super.
Yep. Buck versus Bell, 1927. Eugenics? Are we going to talk about eugenics?
We talk about
Yes, please. The court declared in this wonderful decision, which still stands today as good law. It's never been overturned, in case you're wondering. In an 8-1 decision written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. The court upheld the forced sterilization of those with intellectual disabilities. I'll say it again. The court upheld the forced sterilization of those with intellectual disabilities. Quote, for the protection and health of the state. Justice Holmes ruled that society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind, and ended the opinion by declaring that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough in their kind. That's pretty interesting terminology right there, I got to tell you. Anything you want to say about that one?
I think that your relation of it to Nazism is sufficient.
Well, that too, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, I was going to talk about that. So, like, this was before the Nazis, people.
Mhm.
Like the eugenics, there was a whole bunch of countries that were taking part in eugenics way before the Nazis did eugenics.
Mhm.
All right, you need to read up on this a little bit. Korematsu versus United States, 1944. This case was a direct result of Pearl Harbor. What was the immediate reaction of the Roosevelt administration after the attack? To establish, execute the unlawful, illegal roundup and incarceration of Japanese Americans in concentration camps throughout the Western United States. These individuals lost their employment, possessions to include land and housing, and the entirety of their constitutional rights. In a 6-3 decision, which is still pretty overwhelming, but not as overwhelming as the civil rights decisions where they're just like, screw black people. We don't give a shit about those people. The court ruled that Korematsu must be detained, that the detention was legal and not done for racial reasons.
How was it? How else was it done?
Hey man, the court deemed that in times of war, the exclusion and or detention of minority groups within the United States was justified, even
That's
if they lost
literally
all of their
racism.
possessions. You want to know something crazy? My half sisters, they come from a lot of Japanese descent, and their families were involved in this in
Mhm.
World War II. Like there's a lot of history of their family on their Japanese side. They were in internment camps. They were in internment camps for an extended period of time. I mean, like if you talk to them about this, they get really pissed off about it, and they freaking should.
They should. And
Yeah.
that happened on up in the Pacific Northwest too, a lot.
Mm-hmm. And we saw it after 9/11.
Yep.
The establishment of the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act, which was like some of the most unconstitutional established institutions
Mhm.
in the United States history by
Mhm.
far.
Yep. Moral edicts based on fear.
Mm-hmm. So the Supreme Court of the United States is an institution, people. An institution that has an incredibly tragic and storied history. An institution that hasn't historically done itself any favors. However, the Supreme Court is by far the most powerful institution in the United States of America. Why? Because it sets legal precedent. Legal precedent to which we must all abide. Failure to do so will, most likely, unless you're a member of the oligarchy, additionally in good standing, get your ass incarcerated. They are additionally powerful because, like kings, they are unelected. And like kings, they serve for a lifetime. When folks say that elections have consequences, these are the consequences they should be referring to. Because when we elect a president, we elect him for 4 to 8 years. But if that president can appoint some Supreme Court justices, like how Trump appointed a whopping 3 Supreme Court justices in 4 years, then that president has a legacy that can last his entire lifetime and beyond. And if that justice is bad, tough shit, man, because he or she ain't going nowhere.
Forever.
Forever.
Why do they always live so long? Their lifespans are
It's
so
like
much
Kagan.
longer than the average.
Kagan could have done a heck of a lot if she would have got out of there and let them vote on the abortion thing.
Who?
They, or not Kagan. What's her name?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Ginsburg.
Yeah.
She could have been replaced during the Obama administration with another like-minded justice, but she didn't, and Trump replaced her.
Yep.
So for them, tough stuff, man. Tough cookies.
I don't. It still shouldn't be like
How it works.
I have this little muppy because she was about to bug the other dog.
I'm good to hear it. All right, so now we're doing cultural morality based on founding ideals.
Come always when you see my topics, I'm like, that sounds boring.
It's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot. This is
It's
a
not
long one.
boring.
We're making up for missing last week. That's
It's
what's
not
happening.
boring either.
I'm giving you this.
Okay.
All right. So we're talking a lot about moral reasoning. So moral blah, 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 blah. Moral reasoning. It's a tricky thing. Morality is arguably a sociocultural endeavor, and that includes individual development, cognitive processes, and general social guidelines to maintain basic human domains of existence. Laws are, in some ways, formalized agreements within societies that protect individuals from harm. They promote common welfare and generally provide a space in which humans can live, work, and operate with some assurance of protection. Laws are the result of general rules, which are the result of cultural mores, which are just basically collections of agreed upon individual perceptions of right, wrong, harmful, not harmful, acceptable, unacceptable, etc. This is obviously hugely reductive. But my point is that when we create consequences for behaviors, we are negatively and positively reinforcing behaviors within individuals. Positive and negative reinforcement or punishment is not necessarily good or bad. Positive means that there is something applied to encourage continued behavior, like a treat for a dog that obeys commands. Negative reinforcement is the removal of something to encourage a behavior, like taking a tablet away from a child that doesn't complete their chores. The positive way of looking at that is allowing screen time for completion of chores. It's the same deal, but it's just different framing. So when we look at our moral development as individuals, there are a lot of cognitive developmental theories that you've probably heard of. Moving away from the Freudian concepts of like a highly internalized narrative informing decision-making and psychosis, many behaviors that are described by developmental psychologists are those that look at the external expressions of behavior, such as Skinner's experiments with pigeons. So there are some compelling videos in which it looks very much like he's trained pigeons to read. So the word turn appears and the pigeon turns and then gets to eat the food given as a result. And then the word peck appears and the pigeon pecks and then they receive positive reinforcement in the form of birdseed. So depending on your definition of reading, like the pigeon has memorized the shape and appearance of the words. It's not
Sight words.
Well, yeah, it's sight words, it's iconography, it's image, like that. This is why people who read Mandarin don't have dyslexia, because it's conceptually and imagery based. It's not decoding it. Mm-hmm. So if you consider that reading, then I mean, that's kind of miraculous. So if we change the font or Skinner told the bird like verbally turn or peck and it did what he said, that would be amazing. But it's really just really simple conditioning. It also helps that the pigeons were chronically kept at 75% of their normal body weight so that they would always be very inspired to engage in the experiment because they were hungry.
Yep. That helps.
Yeah. But it's not unlike people. So children in particular are incredibly adept at navigating environments and their own needs without much understanding of why or how they're behaving as they are. So children of neglect, particularly those with malnutrition or food insecurity, will display scarcity behaviors like hoarding food or in some cases eating right through packaging in secret. Developmental psychology tells us that we're relational creatures. residing in an ecological model of existence, which really just means that we are both products of our internal and external environments and relationships. So that idea of nature versus nurture is an extremely old dichotomy and no longer deserves its isolated concepts of human development. We are constantly changing, evolving, and augmenting to the who, what, why, and where of life. Plasticity.
Mm-hmm.
So on a larger scale, scarcity behaviors are evident in post-depression habits, for example. Significant prudence in financial decisions, stockpiling food and supplies, wasting nothing, taking what's available. We all have like that one elderly relative that lived through the Depression and doesn't throw away bread bags and reuses birthday cards. I mean, my grandma reuses birthday cards. It's not a bad thing. I don't mind it at all, but she'll like get a card. You only write on the right side. You now have a postcard card. Write whatever you want on there. It's beautiful. She reuses them all the time. These habits transfer. And habits born out of trauma can transfer too, whether it's individualized or it's social trauma. We adjust our behavior to survive, which is how we come upon social virtues that translate into morality, which eventually can turn into laws.
Good old laws.
Oh, yeah.
Love those laws.
Litigious society. So just for an example, consider what marriage does. So marriage forms filial and socioeconomic bonds. It increases stability for individuals. It provides optimal child rearing circumstances and a lot more. All of this has nothing to do with romance or desire, which are largely biochemical and sexual responses to a potential mate.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different. Arranged marriages, even modern ones, have around a 4% divorce rate. This doesn't account for laws regarding divorce in respective countries, and it doesn't measure happiness necessarily, but compare that to the whopping 50%, which is conservative. It's probably higher to 60. That 50% minimum of all marriages of choice in the U.S. result in divorce.
Isn't it crazy to me that like 4% of arranged marriages end up in divorce and 50% of like chosen marriages end up in divorce? That's wild to me.
It indicates intent.
Yeah, that's wild.
Well, and it is wild. And divorce is catastrophic. It's catastrophic for families, for communities, for children.
Yeah.
Children of divorce fare poorer than other kids, and inequitable divorces have the same enormous risk factors as children who experience abuse and neglect. That's not even addressing the financial issues that divorce creates. This, divorce diminishes financial solvency in usually one, but sometimes both parents. And so it's not a leap then to see why divorce becomes a moral argument in a lot of religions and cultures. It's the same way that alcohol consumption, contaminated food practices, sociocultural strata mixing, all of these have become moral arguments that originate in preservation of communal ways of life and well-being. Here's the rub, though. Tribal rules are different from community rules, and those are different from cultural rules, and those are different from society rules. And ultimately, the wider the net cast over people groups, the more difficult it becomes to create meaningful and enforceable moral edicts. Outside of some basic human value orientations, of which some researchers say there's like 13, we are inclined to adhere to the morality we develop in. Even our attachment style in infancy and early childhood informs our concept of God and authority, or at least provides a template we reframe or address as we encounter new information or new relationships. This augmentation of values is continuous and a part of every human throughout their lifespan. We develop different thoughts and opinions as we mature and navigate life. It's like I always talk about before, turning the gem, looking at stories and parables. So when we create widespread laws based on moral arguments, we force our own developmental states of morality on the rest of society, which creates, understandably, friction. We see this today. We see far left, far right, staunchly independent, and in all walks of life, in all perspectives, there is a moral argument at its root. The purpose of law, and this is from you, because you introduced me to Frédéric Bastiat's book, aptly titled "The Law."
The Law. It's a great,
shockingly short,
very short, very good read.
It's a punch in the face, though, and it describes what should and should not be counted as lawful and unlawful. Accompanying our identity politics, virtue signaling, and desire for control and recognition, we have a society that forgets liberty is not everyone does what I say.
Yep.
Liberty is the freedom to live as one chooses, free from harm, and with basic human rights protected by laws designed to protect, not extort. There is a moral argument for anything, anywhere, at any time. Morality is like, we saw this with masks. Suddenly people thought masks were moral.
Mhm.
Like, that's an insane thing to really hit your, like, what does that, hit your horse to?
And not just that, but it was moral to rat on all your neighbors.
Yes. Yes.
You were the greater
Mhm.
good.
Yep, exactly. Because there's a moral argument for anything, we have to compare morality to stress because it is highly perceptual. And for the most part, with extreme exceptions, we can't really always agree completely.
Mhm.
We do largely agree, for example, that murder is wrong. Yet in practice, we still enact death penalties and feed global war machines. It's a lot of death. It's a lot of innocent death.
Wow.
We may label first trimester abortion as murder, but societally, we utterly neglect all of the thousands of children in foster care that are sleeping right now in this minute with their belongings, everything they own, in a garbage bag, having been removed from their home. And they are now sleeping in a caseworker's office as she struggles to stay awake scrolling the internet on her phone because there's nowhere for them to go and the system doesn't care. So who do we care about? What do we value? Do we value a heartbeat or do we value a child? Morality is an individualized perspective informed by our development. And when it is translated into law, we are no longer engaged in justice, but enforcing dominant values on the public. Please correct me if I'm wrong here.
Mhm.
I get nervous when I go into politics. I'm like, I feel like I know a lot about some things, but not anything about others. But so it seems to me that the intention of our country was to walk that fine line between liberty and safety. And the way to do that was to give people the resources to make informed choices about right and wrong. This means freedom of religion. You explore your faith however you need to. Education, food security, employment, housing, clean water, safety from international and domestic threats, and ultimately the space to live out our individual values. This was also supposed to be constructed at the state level. And with all of the new Supreme Court decisions that we're talking about, it's important to remember people are nuanced, and widespread penalties for different value sets is not what our founders intended. No one person is absolutely correct, and no one person stays the same in their lifetime. Our job is to provide the necessary ingredients for independent, critical thought, and to not force others to believe and behave only in the ways we approve of. We are pigeons in a box, and our federal government is B.F. Skinner. We are told on repeat, informally or formally, that we will receive incentive if we respond in certain ways. If we put on a mask, we can go to the grocery store. If we get vaccinated, we can work and feel virtuous. If we vote blue, we're adhering to democratic values. If we vote red, we're draining the swamp and rooting out deception. We're turning when we see turn and pecking when we see peck. And we're getting little grains of tribal identity and moral superiority that actually don't mean much at all. We are starved. We are at 75% of our freedom, aching for more, with our governmental Skinner saying that free will is really non-existent because all behavior has a root cause, and therefore stimulus response replaces the concept of will. So, with all of these decisions that you and I and everyone may or may not agree with the Supreme Court, and all of the political dissent and all of the deception that is coming from every angle, it feels like, I do want to encourage everybody to just get out of the box. You're not a pigeon. You are a thoughtful, insightful person that deserves the opportunity to find information and resources to make your own choices. Our government's role is not to provide moral direction. It's got a horrific track record in that, as you just very clearly outlined.
Mhm.
Its role is to create the safety and opportunity that is necessary for you to thrive. This is the essence of life and of liberty and of the pursuit of happiness.
Awesome. Also, Benjamin Franklin quote that goes right along with this: those that would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. In other words, if you're willing to give up everybody's liberty to feel a little bit safe, you don't deserve either. We saw that a lot pretty recently.
Yep.
Right? I think that goes really, really good with what you said, which is freaking outstanding, of course. As per usual. All right, coward of the week. Coward of the week. My coward of the week is fairly simple. Any individual that fails in his or her responsibility as a father, mother, or parent in general, if that is your responsibility. And that could be grandparents, foster parents, lots of different kinds of parents, just like you were talking about. I'm sure there are plenty of you out there that have known of, hopefully firsthand and not through some hearsay crap, of deadbeat parents. A mom or a dad that, quite frankly, can't get out of their own BS or out of their own way enough to support or implement a support structure that would take care of the needs of their own children. For those of you that may not know, Joe Biden has 7 grandchildren: Naomi, Finnegan, Macy, Natalie, Robert, Bo, and Baby Doe. Baby Doe, that's an interesting name, as the media likes to refer to her. Baby Doe is a 4-year-old little girl living in Arkansas. She is the daughter of President Biden's son, Hunter. Publicly, Joe Biden only acknowledges that he has 6 grandchildren, not 7. And recently, the Biden family settled a civil case involving little 4-year-old Baby Doe. The specifics: a settlement was reached with the family stating that the little girl is never, ever, under any circumstances, to take the Biden name. Now, I'm going to play you a little clip, and it's a little bit longer than the clips I usually play, but I think that it's worth it.
So you guys may know Hunter Biden has a child that he is providing child support payments to, but just reached a settlement with the mom to never take the Biden last name for this child. And his father, President Biden, doesn't even acknowledge that this child exists. He frequently says very specifically he has 6 grandchildren. Well, if you included this child, who is his grandchild, that would be 7 grandchildren. And Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, obviously liberal, oftentimes Biden supporter, actually just penned a column quite critical of the president for his treatment of this 7th grandchild. The ladies of View decided to weigh in on this in their own special way. Let's take a listen.
Maureen Dowd is saying it's bad for the child that the president has not acknowledged her. So I kind of think, well, she should be fetching at the son, whose baby it is. It's not the president's baby. So I don't know what you think, but I'm throwing it out.
I agree with you completely. It shouldn't have been, directed to Joe Biden. It should be directed to Hunter Biden. It's 5 children, not 4, Hunter, because this is not Joe Biden's baby. And I think it's very hard for Joe Biden to be a grandfather to the child if his son is not being a father. He can talk to his child. He can advise Hunter. But look, what is absolutely evident to me is that the right wing and the MAGA world has decided to weaponize Hunter Biden against his dad.
Yeah.
And everything and anything Hunter does or does not do is going to be weaponized.
I have to tell you, this story actually affected me way more than I expected it to. Let's go ahead and put Maureen Dowd's column up on the screen. She talks about this little 4-year-old girl in rural Arkansas who's growing up there, learning to ride a camouflage pattern 4-wheeler alongside her cousins. Some days she wears a bow in her hair. On other days, she threads her long blonde ponytail through the back of a baseball cap. When she's old enough, she'll learn to hunt just like her mother did when she was young. She says the girl is aware that her father is Hunter Biden. Her paternal grandfather is the president of the United States. She speaks about both of them often, but she has not met them. Her maternal grandmother describes her as wit, smart, and funny. Listen, this is the president who has made family central to his political brand. I mean, and I think that's part of what the American people have really responded to with him. You know, it's his empathy, it's the way that he centers his family and the tragedies that have befallen his family, even the way that he has embraced Hunter despite a lot of struggles with addiction and, you know, major roller coaster there, to say the least. I don't know how you just disown this child. I just don't know how you can morally justify that in any instance. And, you know, this is like a normal family in rural Arkansas. The dad, who's kind of the patriarch there, this is the child's grandfather on his mother's side, her mother's side. He owns a gun store. I think he went hunting with Don Jr. Like, he seems to have some Republican leanings.
So
Who cares?
Yeah.
So what? And to me, it comes across, especially the piece about how hard they fought to make sure that this child could not have the Biden last name. I mean, it really smacks of classism. It smacks of just elitism, like you aren't worthy enough and the circumstances of your birth are too tawdry for us to even acknowledge that you exist, and certainly not to welcome you into the family. I don't think it's defensible, and I think it's grotesque that The View tried to defend it.
Oh, it's
All right, so that was Crystal and Sagar from Breaking Points, and they went over the stuff from The View to give them the credit they're due. Man, like the way that she feels about this, I feel about this very, very, very much so the same way. Listen, I appreciate the fact that Hunter's paying child support. I mean, if he's even really the one fucking paying it, which I doubt.
Well,
he
he was
didn't
the one
even
who
pay
paid his taxes, right?
Didn't even pay his own tax bill.
Yeah.
So I doubt that he is. I mean, the reason I can't discount that is I am a man who pays an extensive amount of child support for 3 kids myself. I know what goes into that. Of course, I'm not a Biden. However, it sits terribly badly with me. You and I, we got 5 kids. We're a blended family. I got 3, you got 2. I simply cannot imagine someone intentionally, deliberately, overtly refusing to acknowledge the existence of a 4-year-old little girl. Like when my daughter was 4, she was like, she might as well have been Cleopatra. You know what I mean? Like, and nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same thing with my with my parents, who are her grandparents. And I mean, like, they're all very, very involved. I mean, Joe Biden is not off the hook because he's this kid's grandpa. Like they want to just say that he doesn't have to acknowledge this little girl because his son's not acknowledging the girl. Publicly, Biden will not say that he has more than 6 grandkids. He won't. He will not even address or even discuss Hunter's 4-year-old little girl in Arkansas. Refuses. There was a clip that I watched of the press secretary, like, walking out of the room when the question was asked. I mean, what the hell is that girl going to think when she's like 15 and she watches those clips? As a father raising 3 pipe-hitting, crazy-ass boys, the outcomes of unbelievably privileged kids like Hunter Biden are unacceptable to me. They're entirely unacceptable. Under zero circumstances would I ever deny the existence of a grandchild. Grandparents play pivotal roles in their grandkids' lives all the time, all over the place. This is very personal. Mel's kids have a fantastic relationship with their biological father's parents, their grandparents. Fantastic relationship with them. While their father, their biological father, remains entirely uninvolved and disinterested, completely. But not his parents, not his grandparents. For almost all American families, grandparents play a pivotal role. They cannot should it be discounted. They play a pivotal role internationally as well. It's not just in the United States. They wouldn't want you to discount their importance either. I know that my mom wouldn't. You know what I mean? I know that your kids' grandparents on their dad's side wouldn't. They call all the time. They're super invested.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Biden is the president of the United freaking States of America. He's supposed to set some kind of example. I don't know. Am I wrong?
No.
Is that wrong? This little girl knows that this dude is her grandfather. She knows it. She probably sees him on TV all the time. Refusing to publicly acknowledge a child who knows who her father is, who her grandfather is. I mean, can you imagine what it's going to be like for this little girl growing up, knowing who she is, what bloodline she came from, and then she has to what? Pretend? She has to pretend that she doesn't know the truth because of some civil case where she can't use their freaking name? It's bullshit. It's bullshit. If you don't take care of your damn kids, acknowledge your kids, acknowledge innocent individuals to which you or your family is responsible for, especially if they're children, man. You're a coward. Straight up coward.
I understand that there's some identity protection for her, but the idea they're calling her Baby Doe, with the exception that that's actually her name is Doe, all it makes me think of is Jane Doe. And all that makes me think of is that they're giving her as much personhood as an unidentified, like, victim of a crime.
Mm-hmm.
And it is criminal. I feel
terrible.
it is criminal.
It's terrible.
It's so sad.
It's disgusting. It's outright disgusting. That's what it is.
Okay. As usual, my hero is going to be short. It's always positive. It has to be positive. Okay, I might say this wrong. The Mahila Housing Trust. You may not know who they are. They are a nonprofit that operates out of India. And they are focused on women's empowerment, and not just like women's empowerment, like, yay, wear what you want, but like really, really specific infrastructure changes that can help women access education and independent livelihoods. So the Mahila Housing Trust just recently had this innovative idea of sourcing white reflective paint. Super cheap, easy to apply, like everyone can paint something. Not a big deal. But this white reflective paint, you can, they were providing for free to women to coat the roof of their homes in India. And in this particular region that they were focusing on, the temperatures can exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, which to me is like almost a safe temperature to cook chicken. So that's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane. So they're providing these cans of paint. These women were coming, picking them up. They were going and painting the tops of their houses. And it was, effective to decrease the internal temperature of the homes by an average of about 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is it's a big deal. Yeah. It's a difference between 73 and 80 degrees in your house. And one of the women interviewed said that it was really nice because she was 19 years old and she was the primary tutor for a variety of kids in the neighborhood. And it was nice to have that reflective paint because it diminished the temperature enough where it stopped the nosebleeds of the children within the house, which is both tragic and wonderful. So my hero of the week is the Mahila Housing Trust because they are using cost-effective, locally applied, simple yet innovative solutions to enhance the quality of life of people who are regularly forgotten.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
it's awesome. That's a really cool. God, I feel like right now I want to paint the roof white.
It's super. That's true. That's true. That looks super cute.
Baseball today was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, every single person. How you doing? Really hot. I want the 500 inches of snow back.
I know we had like a 6-month, 500-inch winter, but man, I tell you what, it's hot today.
And in my Washington brain, I'm like, shut your mouth.
Good work.
I love you. Okay. Night, night, everybody.